Okay, now we're going to mark off the height of the bridge, and we're going to take a long straight edge and place it on the neck, once in the middle and once on each side, about where the high and low E strings would be. And then I'm going to mark where that would extend to on the bridge itself. The idea here being that we're extending the top of the frets all the way down to the bridge to know where the height of the bridge should be. And note, we're not referring to the saddle here, this is the actual bridge itself. The saddle will be a little higher to give us our string action. And now I'm just going to take those marks and just sort of connect the dots, and then you just want to sand or plane. Dremel tool works really well here as well, and take off the excess wood until your bridge looks something like this, and you get down to those marks that you measured. And I'm just going to double check that we've got our height right. That straight edge laying on top of the frets like this through the center should land just on top of the bridge. And you just want to finish sand this down until that meets right there with the top of those frets. And now I'm going to take just a countersink. The drill bit in this is smaller than the actual bridge pin holes. So all I'm going to be doing here is taking away some wood for the countersink itself. Like you see here, do that for all 6 strings. And then we're going to start to shape the holes for the bridge pin. These have a taper to them, and we drilled them to the smallest size, so they really won't go in the way they are. What we have to do is take a needle file and sort of remount these holes until the taper on the hole matches the taper on the bridge pin, and then you get a nice snug fit. And you want to take your time with this. Keep it nice and even. Just take out small amounts at a time. And then just test the pin to see how far it will go into the hole. And then take out a little bit more each time until you get it to seat at the height that you want it to be. Some people prefer them to be a little higher than others. Really depends, I think, on the type of tool that you use to pull them when you're changing strings. But here they all are in place and gotten to the height that I like them to be. Okay, now we're going to start the nut. This is the nut blank, just a bone nut blank. And here I've taken a pencil and cut it in half basically and just planed the bottom smooth. And now I'm going to take a feeler gauge that's close to the whatever string action you prefer. You can set this to wherever you really want. I'm using 0.015 here. And I actually just put the feeler gauge there on the bottom of the pencil just to separate it off the frets. And then I'll put it on the first couple of frets and just scribe a line in, which gives me the height that I want that nut to be. And you can see how we've got the proper radius drawn in here. And I'm also going to mark the outside edges so it's the same width as the fretboard. Now I'm just going to take a regular file and put this in a vise and just file it down to those marks. And you can see here I've left just a little bit of room there, and then I've also tapered this sort of leaning back toward the headstock to where the tallest part of the nut is next to the fingerboard. And now you want to measure out and put your string spacing in there. And again, this is sort of a personal preference too. I typically use about a 7 or 8 millimeter spacing between the strings, just depending on the size neck that I'm working with. And there you can see where I've got the strings marked out. Okay, and now I'm going to show you some tricks to putting the slots in. Now I like to take a feeler gauge, especially on the small strings, the high E string, probably the second and third strings too. And I take a little feeler gauge and a file, and I just rough up the outer edge and I use the gauge that matches the size string that I'm going to use there. And I'm just cutting some really small grooves in there with the files to kind of give it some teeth. And then I put it on that mark, and I use it just like you would a saw to just cut a slot that is the exact same size as our string. And now you want to angle this back toward the headstock and make sure that the string breaks right there at the front of the fingerboard. And then you want to work the slot down to where we get to our pencil mark. And just the real concern here, make sure you don't go too deep. And then I'll move up to the next string with another feeler gauge that matches that size. And work it the same way. And if it gets kind of dull while you're doing this, just take the file and resharpen it up, give it a little more tooth, and keep sawing. And then repeat this process again for the third string. And now here I'm going to start taking some excess string, the actual size string on the 4th, 5th, and 6th strings. I'm actually going to start these by using the string itself as a saw and working it till it's the proper size and depth. And now with the 5th and 6th strings, the low strings, you might actually start that slot with a small hacksaw. Just make sure that the blade is narrower than the slot needs to be. But you can cut this very carefully down to the proper depth. Same with the low E string. And then do like before and take a piece of the actual string and round out the bottoms on those low strings. And likewise, you can do this on the 4th string as well if you have a blade that's small enough. Kind of depends on the size of the particular set of strings you're going to use. And then finish it up here on the low E string. Round out the bottom on that one. And then you can go back and just readjust any particular slots that need to be lowered, and just make sure they get all down to that pencil line and that they're all pretty uniform and smooth. You don't want any of your strings to be higher or lower than the others. They all should follow that arch very well and very closely. And then once you've got those cut, I just like to take a small file and dress the top of the nut. Make sure I've got a good slant there going back toward the headstock. And then round out and smooth out the sides. Make sure that they trim flush with the fingerboard itself. And then with the nut in place, we can put the strings in, and I'll show you in the next video how we'll use the high and low strings, the high and low E string, to put the proper compensation on the saddle so that the strings will have the right intonation. And once you've kind of filed it, you just want to sand everything nice and smooth here. Clean it all up, and it's done.